He thought he was the master manipulator, the one playing the long game. For 5 years he had cultivated the perfect image of a loving husband, all while secretly despising his wife's simple, frugal life. He thought she was just a stepping stone, a placeholder, until he could secure his future with a woman of real power. He had a meticulously crafted plan to leave her with virtually nothing on their 5th wedding anniversary. What he never ever suspected was that his wife's nothing was a billion-dollar empire, and she was simply waiting for the perfect moment of betrayal to take back everything he had and everything he ever hoped to be. Charlotte Adler lived a life painted in shades of beige. Not the elegant sandy beige of a cashmere throw, but the dull, forgotten beige of a doctor's office waiting room. Her 2-story home in a respectable yet unremarkable suburban cul-de-sac was tastefully decorated, but held no single item that would catch the eye or spark a conversation. Her car, a sensible 5-year-old sedan, was always clean and impeccably maintained. She clipped coupons, boasted about finding organic chicken on sale, and her greatest weekly thrill seemed to be the arrival of the Sunday newspaper with its plethora of promotional flyers. To her husband, Benjamin Adler, she was the physical embodiment of mediocrity, a safe, predictable, and utterly boring choice. And that was precisely how Charlotte had designed it. Ben, on the other hand, strained against the confines of their beige life like a swooned panther. He was a man who believed he was destined for a world of chrome glass and skyline views. He worked as a portfolio manager at a mid-tier investment firm, a job that was respectable by any normal standard. But to Ben, it was a purgatory. He wore his suits like armor, and his ambition like a cologne, a scent of desperation and desire that Charlotte could smell on him even when he was sleeping. "Did you remember to set the DVR for that documentary on municipal bonds?" Charlotte asked one Tuesday evening, her voice the epitome of gentle domesticity. She was stirring a pot of lentil soup, the very picture of a thrifty, health-conscious homemaker. Ben looked up from his sleek, company-issued tablet, his brow furrowed in a way that was meant to convey deep thought, but only projected irritation. "Charlie, for God's sake." "No. I have a billion-dollar merger proposal to review. I don't have the mental bandwidth for public debt financing." $1 billion? Charlotte thought a small secret smile playing on her lips as she turned back to the stove. If only you knew. Their marriage had begun 5 years ago, a whirlwind romance by all outside accounts. Ben was charming, handsome, and radiated an energy that promised a future far grander than his present. Charlotte, working as a quiet librarian in a small town, had seemed utterly captivated. On their 2nd date, she had confessed with practiced hesitation that she came from a comfortable family. She explained that she had a modest trust fund enough to provide a nice cushion, but that her parents had raised her to be self-sufficient and wary of fortune hunters. It was the perfect bait. Ben, whose own family was solidly middle class, saw a golden opportunity. A wife with a bit of her own money, enough to ease the financial pressures while he climbed the corporate ladder, but not so much that she would have any real power over him. He had readily agreed to sign the prenuptial agreement her lawyer had drawn up. He'd barely even read it, so confident was he in its simplicity. It protected her modest inheritance, and in return he was insulated from any of her family's potential debts. It seemed laughably straightforward, a formality. In reality, the document was a 200-page masterpiece of legal warfare crafted by Marcus Thorne, the sharpest legal mind on the West Coast, and the man who had overseen the Prescott family fortune for 40 years. It was a sleeping dragon, designed to protect not a modest trust fund, but an inheritance so vast it could swallow Ben's entire world whole without so much as a burp. Charlotte was not Charlotte Vance, the small-town librarian. She was Charlotte Prescott, the sole heiress to the Prescott family's industrial and real estate empire, a fortune valued in the tens of billions. She had fled her gilded cage at 25, suffocated by the expectations and the predatory socialites who orbited her family. She craved normalcy. She yearned to be loved for herself, not for the 9 zeros that trailed her name. So she had created Charlotte Vance, a woman who found joy in simple things and waited to see who would love her. Ben was not that man. As their 5th anniversary approached, the date her inheritance would be fully and irrevocably transferred to her control. Ben's restlessness had morphed into a palpable disdain. He was more critical, more distant. He scoffed at her budget spreadsheets and rolled his eyes when she suggested a weekend camping trip instead of a lavish resort. "We need to project an image of success, Charlie," he'd say, his tone laced with condescension. "You can't show up to a firm networking event, smelling of campfire and driving that sensible car." He had started working later. His phone was now perpetually angled away from her, and the scent of an expensive, unfamiliar perfume clung to his suits some nights. Charlotte was no fool. She knew the signs. She had seen them 100 times in her parents' world, the casual betrayals and calculated affairs that were as common as canapés at a gala. She had hoped with a desperate, foolish part of her heart that her beige world would be immune. But as she watched him now, tapping impatiently on his tablet, his face illuminated by the cold blue light, she knew her experiment in normalcy was coming to a dramatic and painful end. He was pulling away because he thought he had finally found his ticket to the life he craved, a life he believed she could never be a part of. "The soup's almost ready," she said softly, her voice betraying none of the cold certainty hardening in her gut. "I'm not hungry," he muttered, not looking up. "I'm meeting with Richard Sterling from the Sterling Ross Group tonight. It's a huge opportunity. I'll probably just grab something with him." Charlotte's hand tightened on the wooden spoon. Sterling Ross, the biggest rival to her family's primary investment division, and she knew for a fact that Richard Sterling, a notorious corporate shark, did not do business dinners with mid-level portfolio managers. But his daughter, Sophia Rossi, certainly did. Sophia, a sleek, ambitious brunette whose social media was a curated gallery of exclusive parties and high-powered connections. Sophia, whose father ran the Ross half of Sterling Ross. Charlotte felt a familiar icy calm settle over her. It was the Prescott calm, the unnerving stillness her grandfather was famous for, right before he orchestrated a hostile takeover. The act was over. Ben had made his move. He just didn't realize he was playing checkers while she was about to overturn the entire chessboard. "Okay, honey," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "Don't work too hard. I'll just leave some in the fridge for you." He grunted in response, already lost in his world of ambition and deceit. He didn't see the look in his wife's eyes. The beige was gone. In its place was the cold, hard glint of polished steel. The game was on. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception. Charlotte played the part of the slightly worried, slightly clueless wife to perfection. She packed his lunches, fretted over him working too hard, and asked just enough naive questions about his big deal with Sterling Ross to reinforce his belief in her ignorance. Inside, she was a tightly coiled spring of fury and focus. Every night after he fell asleep, she would retreat to her small home office, the one he called her hobby room, and transform from Charlotte Adler suburban homemaker into Charlotte Prescott corporate strategist. Her old password-protected laptop, a relic from her past life that Ben mistook for a sentimental piece of junk, became her command center. The Prescott empire wasn't just old money. It was smart money. It had diversified, evolved, and its intelligence network was formidable. A few encrypted emails to Marcus Thorne set the wheels in motion. Within days, she had a complete dossier on Ben's life outside their beige walls. The file was clinical brutal and confirmed everything. It contained restaurant receipts, hotel bookings under his corporate card, and discreet photographs of Ben with Sophia Rossi. They weren't just meeting. They were a couple laughing intimately over candlelit dinners, his hand possessively on her back. Sophia was everything Charlotte pretended not to be, bold, dripping in designer labels, and radiating a shark-like ambition that mirrored Ben's own. The most damning piece of evidence was a transcript of a conversation from a listening device one of Marcus's investigators had placed in Ben's car. It was from 3 days prior. Sophia's voice, smooth and amused. "I still can't believe you've lasted 5 years with that beige little mouse. Does she really still think your last name is your biggest asset?" Ben's laugh, a sound that made Charlotte's blood run cold. "Patience, my love. That was always the deal I made with myself." 5 years. The prenup is ironclad, about protecting her little nest egg. But after 5 years of marriage, the communal property laws kick in. The timing with our anniversary and this merger, it's perfect. I'll file she'll be blindsided, and I'll walk away with half of our joint assets, my reputation intact as the grieving husband, and enough seed money to be a partner in your father's new venture. He'll see me as a peer, not just his daughter's boyfriend. Sophia. And what about her? What happens to little Charlotte Ben's voice, dripping with contempt? Who cares? She'll go back to her book clubs and her coupon cutting. She won't know what hit her. Honestly, I'm doing her a favor. She was never built for the world we're about to own. Charlotte read the words over and over, the clinical black text searing itself into her memory. He hadn't just cheated. He had been playing a long, calculated game from the very beginning. He hadn't fallen out of love with her. He had never been in love at all. She was just a means to an end, a 5-year investment he was about to cash out. The pain was sharp and visceral, a physical ache in her chest. The little bit of hope she'd harbored, the hope that some part of their life had been real, evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard vacuum. And then the vacuum was filled with rage, a pure, undiluted Prescott rage. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that made her gasp, came from Marcus's deep dive into Ben's work computer. Ben had been using his position at his firm to funnel sensitive data about their clients to Richard Sterling, Sophia's father. He wasn't just planning to join Sterling Ross. He was actively sabotaging his current employer to prove his value to his future one. He was committing corporate espionage. It was reckless, arrogant, and criminally stupid. He was so sure of his own genius that he couldn't see the cliff edge he was sprinting towards. The anniversary was a week away. Ben was becoming more brazen, his stories about late nights at the office more elaborate. He had already started the narrative of their growing apart, making subtle comments to their few mutual acquaintances about how Charlotte's lack of ambition was a real challenge for him. He was laying the groundwork for his role as the victim. The moment of truth came on a Thursday night, the day before their 5th anniversary. Ben came home late, smelling of wine and Sophia's perfume. He found Charlotte in the living room, a photo album open on her lap. "Hey," he said, his voice artificially gentle. "Look at you getting all nostalgic." "I was just thinking," Charlotte said, her voice quiet and steady. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. 5 years. It feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? Ben put his briefcase down, a predatory pity in his eyes. This was it. The perfect opening. He could start the talk now, the gentle, compassionate speech he had been rehearsing for weeks. "Charlie, we need to talk." He began, sitting on the ottoman across from her. He leaned forward, attempting to take her hand. "These last few years, we've just grown into different people. I love you. I will always love the woman I married, but I'm not sure I'm the man who can make you happy anymore." Every word was a perfectly delivered lie. Charlotte let him continue, letting him spin his web of compassionate deceit. He talked about his dreams, his ambitions, and how he felt he was holding her back from a simpler life she deserved. It was a masterpiece of self-serving nonsense. She waited until he had finished, until the silence in the room was heavy with his false sincerity. She looked down at the photo album at a picture of them on their honeymoon, both smiling, one of them faking it. Then she closed the album with a soft but definitive thud. "You're right about one thing, Ben," she said, her voice suddenly devoid of all its practiced softness. It was a voice he had never heard before, clear, cold, and echoing with an authority that made the hairs on his arms stand up. "We have grown into different people. Or rather, I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not." She stood up. "You mentioned your meeting with Richard Sterling, and your ambitions. You think you're on the cusp of something great, don't you? A new partnership, a new life." Ben stared at her, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. The script was veering off course. "Charlotte, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about corporate espionage," she said, her voice slicing through the air. "I'm talking about Regulation FD violations. I'm talking about the confidential client data from your firm that you've been feeding to Sterling Ross for the past 6 months, specifically the information about the Henderson acquisition, which you leaked to give Sterling the upper hand." Ben's face went white. The color drained from his skin, leaving a pasty, sickly mask of shock. How do you know that?" "I know because the Henderson Group is a subsidiary of Prescott Consolidated," Charlotte said, taking a deliberate step towards him. "My family's company, and you, my darling husband, have been trying to use my family's asset to launch your pathetic little career with your mistress." She let the name hang in the air. Prescott. Ben's jaw worked, but no sound came out. His mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. The librarian. The simple life. The Prescott name that was whispered with awe on Wall Street. It was impossible. It was a hallucination. "You," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at her. "I'm the woman whose modest inheritance you were so eager to get your hands on," she finished for him, her voice dripping with ice. "The prenup you signed without reading it has a particularly nasty infidelity clause and a criminal activity clause. As of this moment, every joint account is frozen. The locks on this house will be changed in the morning. A team of forensic accountants is already tearing through every financial transaction you've ever made." She walked to the front door and opened it, letting the cool night air spill into the beige room. "You said you were doing me a favor," she said, her eyes boring into his. So I'm going to do one for you. I'm giving you a 5-minute head start before Marcus Thorne calls the SEC and the district attorney. I'd suggest you use it. The world you're about to own. It's a 6-by-8-foot cell. Now get out of my house. Ben stumbled out into the night, his world shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. The quiet suburban street, once a symbol of his frustrating mediocrity, now looked like the last outpost of a life that was already gone. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. He needed to call Sophia. He needed to call his lawyer. He needed to wake up from this nightmare. But as he stared at the screen, a new email notification popped up. The sender was anonymous, but the subject line was a single word: consequences. He opened it. Attached was a single, high-resolution photograph. It was of him and Sophia taken just hours ago, sitting at a secluded table at the city's most exclusive restaurant. They were clinking champagne glasses, a triumphant toast to their future. But that wasn't the shocking part. The photo was time-stamped, and in the background, sitting at the bar and looking directly at the camera with a faint, knowing smile, was a man Ben recognized from financial news covers Richard Sterling, Sophia's father. Beneath the photo was a short line of text. He knew. He was using you, too. The realization hit Ben like a physical blow. Sterling wasn't bringing him in as a partner. He was using Ben's reckless ambition to gather illegal intel on a competitor. Once the deal was done, Sterling would have cut him loose, leaving him to take the fall. Sophia, her father's daughter, was likely in on it. He wasn't the player. He was the pawn being moved by two different queens on the same board. He had been outmaneuvered from every possible angle. His phone rang, but it wasn't Sophia. The caller ID read Marcus Thorne. Ben let it go to voicemail, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was trapped, utterly and completely trapped. Meanwhile, back inside the house, Charlotte sank onto the sofa, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. The confrontation had been clinical precise, but it hadn't erased 5 years of shared memories, however false they may have been. The grief was real, not for the man Ben was, but for the man she had desperately wanted him to be. She picked up her own phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "It's done, Marcus," she said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time that night. I saw came the calm, reassuring voice of Marcus Thorne. "The trackers on his car and phone are active. He's currently hyperventilating in his sedan at the end of the street. Phase 1 is complete." "How are you, Charlotte?" "I'm tired," she admitted. "I'm tired of being Charlotte Adler." "Then it's time for Charlotte Prescott to come home," Marcus said gently. "The jet is fueled. It will be at the private airfield in 2 hours. Your bags are already packed." Charlotte looked around the beige living room. It was a stage set, and the play was over. Each item, the sensible lamp, the generic art, the comfortable but uninspired sofa, was a prop in a life she had constructed as a shield. But the shield had been pierced, and now it was time to pick up the sword. "I'll be there, Marcus. And thank you." "It's my honor," he replied. "Your grandfather would be immensely proud of how you've handled this. He always said you had more steel in you than the rest of the family combined." Hanging up, Charlotte walked through the house one last time. She touched nothing. These were the belongings of a woman who didn't exist anymore. She went upstairs to the master bedroom and opened a closet that Ben had always ignored, one filled with what he thought were her out-of-season clothes. Behind a false panel at the back was her real wardrobe. She pulled out a pair of tailored wool trousers, a silk blouse, and a timeless cashmere coat. The clothes felt like a second skin. In the adjoining bathroom, she wiped away the minimal, natural-looking makeup of Charlotte Adler and applied the subtle, confident look of Charlotte Prescott. When she looked in the mirror, the transformation was startling. The soft, unassuming librarian was gone. In her place was a woman with eyes that held the weight of a dynasty and a jaw set with unshakable resolve. An hour later, a sleek black car with tinted windows pulled silently into the driveway. A security detail, men she had known since she was a child, escorted her from the house without a word. As the car pulled away, she didn't look back. There was nothing there for her. The flight to the West Coast was smooth and silent. As the sprawling lights of her home city appeared below, she felt not a sense of dread, but of homecoming. The jet landed at a private Prescott family hangar, and as she descended the steps, Marcus Thorne was there to greet her, his expression a mixture of concern and pride. "Welcome home, Miss Prescott," he said, a formal title he only used when business was serious. "It's good to be back, Marcus," she said, the city air feeling different, crisper on her skin. They drove directly to Prescott Manor, the sprawling cliffside estate she had run away from a decade ago. It was just as she remembered it, imposing, magnificent, and silent as a tomb. But tonight, it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a fortress. Instated in the grand wood-paneled study, dominated by a portrait of her stern-faced grandfather, Marcus laid out the next phase. "Ben has gone to ground," he reported, handing her a tablet. He tried to contact Sophia, who has blocked his number. He then called his parents, who I believe are as clueless as everyone else. He has approximately $4,000 in a personal checking account that you can't touch. Everything else is locked down. "What about Sterling Ross?" Charlotte asked, her voice sharp. "Richard Sterling is a problem," Marcus admitted. "He's a snake. He will deny everything, sacrifice Ben in a heartbeat, and claim he was the victim of a rogue employee's scheme. The SEC will investigate Ben, but Sterling will likely walk away unscathed unless we force his hand." "Then we force his hand," Charlotte said, without hesitation. "My goal is not just to punish Ben. It's to dismantle the entire corrupt framework that enabled him. Sterling Ross used my husband's greed to commit corporate espionage against my family's company. This wasn't just a betrayal of my marriage. It was an attack on my legacy." Marcus nodded, a grim smile on his face. This was the Charlotte he remembered. Sterling's entire deal, the one Ben was feeding him information for, hinges on acquiring the Henderson Group. Charlotte continued pacing the room. "He thinks he has the inside track. He doesn't know that we've been negotiating a counteroffer through a shell corporation for the past 2 months. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A contingency plan." "A weapon," Charlotte corrected him. "Grandfather always said to have a loaded gun in every room. Our offer is 10% higher, fully financed, and ready to sign. Sterling is about to announce his triumphant acquisition at the annual Foundation for the Arts Gala in 3 days. It's the biggest society event of the year. He plans to be the king of the city." A cold, brilliant plan began to form in her mind, a plan worthy of the Prescott name. It was audacious, public, and utterly devastating. "Marcus," she said, turning to him, her eyes shining with a dangerous light. "I need you to get me a ticket to that gala. And I need you to arrange a meeting with the board of the Henderson Group for tomorrow morning. It's time to remind Mr. Sterling what happens when you try to poach from a Prescott." The ghost of Prescott Manor was back, and she was ready to haunt them all. The next 72 hours were a blur of calculated aggression, conducted not with shouting and threats, but with the quiet, lethal precision of a sniper. While Ben Adler was hiding out in a dingy motel on the outskirts of the city, frantically trying to find a lawyer who would even take his call, Charlotte Prescott was waging a war on multiple fronts from the opulent command center of her family's study. Her first move was the meeting with the Henderson Group's board. They were a conservative old guard company, spooked by the aggressive tactics of Richard Sterling. They had been leaning towards his offer purely because they believed it was the only serious one on the table. Charlotte walked into their boardroom not as a woman scorned, but as the calm, powerful head of Prescott Consolidated's future. She didn't mention Ben or Sterling's underhanded tactics. Instead, she laid out a vision. She spoke of stability, long-term growth, and respecting their company's legacy. She knew their business inside and out, pointing out synergies and potential for innovation that Sterling in his haste had overlooked. Then she presented the offer from her shell corporation, North Star Holdings. It was clean significantly higher and guaranteed the jobs of their senior management team, a key sticking point that Sterling had planned to ignore. "We believe in building, not dismantling," she concluded, her voice resonating with confidence. "Sterling Ross sees you as a stepping stone. We see you as a cornerstone." By the time she left the meeting, the tide had turned. The board was swayed. They agreed to accept the North Star offer, pending a final vote the next day, the afternoon of the gala. The trap was set. Her second front was a subtle but devastating campaign against Ben's professional reputation. Marcus Thorne, using his extensive network, began disseminating the truth of the situation through carefully chosen channels. He didn't leak to the press. He spoke to the quiet kingmakers of their world, the heads of executive recruitment firms, the senior partners at major law firms, the influential board members who sat on a dozen different committees. The narrative was simple and deadly. Benjamin Adler was not a rising star, but a reckless liability. He had engaged in criminal activity, betrayed his firm, and attempted to defraud a significant family, the Prescotts. The name itself was enough to send a chill through the financial community. No one wanted to be associated with a man who had made an enemy of such a powerful and notoriously private dynasty. By the end of the day, Ben's name was poison. Every door he might have knocked on was being silently, firmly closed. Her third front was personal. Charlotte had a team quietly pack up every item Ben owned from the house. His designer suits, his expensive watches, his collection of self-important business books. Everything was boxed up and sent not to his motel, but to his parents' modest home in another state. It was a clear, unambiguous message. Your life here is over. The locks were changed, and a top-tier security firm now patrolled the property. Throughout it all, Charlotte maintained an unnerving calm. She slept little, fueled by coffee and a cold fury. She was meticulously preparing for the final act. She had her hair and makeup done not in a frivolous, celebratory way, but as a warrior preparing for battle. She chose her weapon for the evening with care, a stunning midnight blue gown. It was elegant and commanding the color of power and depth. Around her neck, she wore the legendary Prescott diamond, a flawless 50-carat stone that hadn't been seen in public for 2 decades. It was not just a piece of jewelry. It was a statement. It was the crown of an empress. Ben, meanwhile, was unraveling. His frantic calls to Sophia went unanswered. His attempts to access his brokerage account were met with a digital wall that read, account frozen, contact administrator. When he finally reached a junior lawyer at his firm, the man's voice was cold. "Ben, I can't officially advise you, but I can tell you that the partners know. They're calling an emergency meeting. The word is that the SEC has opened a formal investigation based on a tip from Marcus Thorne. You need to get a criminal defense attorney, now." Desperate Ben drove to the Sterling Ross building, hoping for a face-to-face with Sophia or her father. He was stopped in the lobby by security. "Mr. Adler, we've been instructed not to allow you upstairs." The guard's face was impassive. "But I have a meeting. I work with Richard Sterling." Ben insisted, his voice cracking. The guard looked down at a memo. "My instructions are clear, sir. You are not taught to be admitted. If you don't leave, we will call the police." Defeated and humiliated, Ben retreated. He was an outcast. He had flown so close to the sun, and now he was in a free fall with no one to catch him. His rage and panic curdled into a new, desperate idea. The gala. Everyone would be at the gala. If he could just talk to Sophia, just explain. He still had the tickets. He'd been given a perk of his supposed new status. He would go. He would confront them. It was his last pathetic chance to salvage something from the wreckage. On the afternoon of the gala, Marcus received a call from the Henderson Group's chairman. The vote was unanimous. They had accepted the offer from North Star Holdings. The final paperwork would be signed and filed within the hour. Sterling's deal was dead. "He doesn't know yet," Marcus told Charlotte as she adjusted the Prescott diamond. "He'll be walking into that gala tonight, thinking he's about to celebrate the biggest victory of his career." A slow, cold smile touched Charlotte's lips. "A victory celebration is a party," she said. "A public execution is a spectacle. And I've always believed in putting on a good show." She stood and looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was no longer hiding. She was formidable, powerful, and in complete control. The quiet war was over. It was time for the public surrender. The foundation for the Arts Gala was the apex of the city's social and financial world. It was held in the grand ballroom of the Museum of Modern Art, a cavernous space of white marble and soaring glass ceilings. The air hummed with the sound of hushed power, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the murmur of billion-dollar deals being born and buried. Richard Sterling and his daughter Sophia Rossi were the undisputed king and princess of the evening. Sterling stood near the entrance, a smug, triumphant smile plastered on his face as he accepted congratulations from a fawning crowd. He was a lion holding court, basking in the glory of a kill he believed was his. Sophia was at his side, radiant in a blood-red dress, her eyes scanning the room with the proprietary air of someone who had just inherited the world. Ben Adler slipped into the event through a side entrance, looking disheveled and frantic. His suit was wrinkled, his face pale with sweat. He looked utterly out of place, a ghost at a feast. He spotted Sophia and started to push his way through the crowd, his movements clumsy and desperate. "Sophia!" He called out, his voice a raw plea. She turned, and her face for a fleeting moment registered shock. Then it hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You're a walking plague. Get away from me." "But our plan," Ben stammered. "Everything we worked for. My wife." "Your wife," Richard Sterling interjected, stepping smoothly between Ben and his daughter. His smile was gone, replaced by a look of icy dismissal. "Son, your marital problems are your own. As for any plan, I think you'll find you were a temporary contractor whose services are no longer required. In fact, they have become a significant liability. Security." Before Ben could even process the betrayal, two large men in tuxedos had him by the arms, steering him firmly toward the exit. The crowd parted, whispering and staring at the public humiliation. It was at that precise moment that the noise in the ballroom suddenly died down. A collective gasp rippled through the hall as all eyes turned to the grand staircase. Descending the stairs was Charlotte Prescott. She moved with an unhurried, regal grace. The midnight blue gown flowed around her, and the Prescott diamond at her throat caught the light, shooting out sparks of brilliant fire. This was not the mousy librarian or the frugal housewife. This was a queen returning to her throne. Her face was serene, her eyes sweeping across the room with a look of cool assessment that made powerful men feel suddenly small. By her side was Marcus Thorne, his expression grim and resolute. The whispers in the room turned from Ben's pathetic ejection to Charlotte's stunning arrival. "Is that Charlotte Prescott? I thought she'd disappeared years ago. Look at that diamond. That's the Prescott diamond. What is she doing here?" Richard Sterling stared, his jaw slack. He knew who she was. The entire financial world knew of the Prescott heiress who had vanished. He looked from Charlotte's powerful, composed face to the pathetic sight of Ben being dragged away. And for the first time, a sliver of genuine fear pierced his arrogant facade. He realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach that he had catastrophically miscalculated. Charlotte didn't look at Ben. Her focus was solely on Sterling. She and Marcus descended the final steps and began walking directly toward him, the crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. "Richard," Charlotte said, her voice calm but carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Congratulations. I hear you're in a celebratory mood tonight." Sterling forced a tight, unnatural smile. "Charlotte, what a surprise. It's been a long time. To what do we owe the honor?" "I just came to deliver some news," she said, stopping directly in front of him. She was close enough that only he and the surrounding few could hear her next words clearly. "As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, the Henderson Group's board voted unanimously to accept a superior offer. Your deal is dead." Sterling's face went ashen. "What? That's impossible. We had an agreement." "You had an assumption," Marcus Thorne corrected him, his voice like gravel. "Based on illegally obtained information from a compromised source." "And that superior offer," Charlotte continued, her voice still a smooth, lethal whisper, "it came from North Star Holdings, a company I own. You were bidding against me, Richard, and you lost. You tried to use my family's stolen information to acquire a company, and in the end, you handed it directly to me on a silver platter." She let that sink in. The public humiliation was just the beginning. The financial devastation was the real blow. He had been played utterly and completely. Then she raised her voice slightly so that more of the avidly listening crowd could hear. "I also wanted to thank you personally, Richard, your star recruit over there." She gestured dismissively toward the door where Ben had disappeared, "was so eager to impress you that he documented his every move, every illegal transfer of data, every meeting. My lawyers found it all terribly illuminating. I believe the term is evidence. The SEC is already in possession of it, but I'm sure they'll be in touch with you directly very soon." Richard Sterling stood frozen, his face a mottled mask of fury and shock. He was ruined. Not just financially, but his reputation was irrevocably shattered in front of the very people he sought to dominate. He had been publicly declawed by a woman he had never even considered a player on the board. Charlotte looked at Sophia, whose face was a picture of disbelief and horror. "And you?" Charlotte said, her voice losing its icy calm for a flicker of genuine pity. "You hitched your wagon to a fool. Learn this lesson: never trust a man who betrays one woman for another. His loyalty is not to a person, but to an opportunity. And you just became a very bad one." With that, she turned her back on them. She didn't need to see the aftermath. She had taken back everything. Not just her assets, but her name, her power, and her narrative. She and Marcus walked through the stunned ballroom, the whispers following them like a wave. She had not come to the gala to socialize or to celebrate. She had come to deliver a message. The Prescott dynasty was not to be trifled with. As she reached the grand entrance, she paused and looked out over the assembly of wealth and power. She had run from this world, once fearing it would consume her. Now she saw it for what it was, a game. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was born to win. The morning after the gala, the city awoke to a story far more scintillating than the usual society pages could offer. The tale of Charlotte Prescott's return was not just gossip, it was a financial earthquake. News outlets from the most respected financial journals to the most salacious online blogs scrambled to piece together the narrative. Photos of Charlotte, regal and commanding in her midnight blue gown, and the fiery Prescott diamond were juxtaposed with grainy images of a distraught Ben Adler being forcibly removed by security. The message was clear: a coup had taken place in plain sight on the city's most public stage. The first and most immediate casualty was Richard Sterling. He arrived at the Sterling Ross Tower to find not a team ready to do damage control, but a delegation from the board of directors waiting for him in his own office. The air was thick with panic and recrimination. Their stock had plummeted in pre-market trading, and the phrase SEC investigation was being uttered in terrified whispers in every corridor. "This is a disaster, Richard," bellowed one of the oldest board members, a man named George Carmichael, slamming a copy of the morning's financial paper on the polished mahogany desk. The headline screamed, "Prescott heiress returns kills Sterling Ross deal amidst espionage allegations." "It's a misunderstanding, a smear campaign," Sterling blustered, but his usual confidence was gone, replaced by the hollow bravado of a cornered animal. "Adler was a rogue employee. We were the victims here." "No one believes that," Carmichael shot back. "You were seen celebrating with him. Your own daughter was his associate. You've exposed this entire company to catastrophic legal and financial risk. You brought a viper into our house, and it turned out he was sent by a dragon. You're done, Richard. The board has already held a preliminary vote. We want your resignation today." Sophia Rossi fared no better. She found her corporate accounts locked and her access to company projects revoked. Her father, in a desperate attempt to create distance, was the one who personally delivered the news. He found her in her sprawling apartment, surrounded by packed suitcases. "You're being reassigned," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any paternal warmth. "The Geneva office. You'll handle archival accounts. It's either that or you're out completely." "Geneva? That's a corporate graveyard," Sophia cried, her face pale with fury. "I helped you with this. I managed Ben. This was supposed to be my triumph, too." Your triumph? Richard scoffed, the cruelty of a desperate man flashing in his eyes. You picked the wrong horse, Sophia. You backed a fool and made an enemy of a Prescott. You showed everyone your ambition, but none of the requisite intelligence. Pack your bags. You're lucky you're getting a soft landing. I'm facing a potential indictment. For Ben Adler, there was no landing at all, only a bottomless free fall. His name became a byword for professional suicide. After being rejected by a dozen high-priced law firms, none of whom would touch a case against the Prescotts, he was forced to accept a court-appointed public defender, an overworked young woman who looked at his case file with a mixture of pity and disbelief. The evidence against him was a mountain. Meticulously compiled by Marcus Thorne's team, it included emails, server logs, bank transfers, and sworn affidavits. It was an open and shut case. His final humiliation came in the form of a single, sterile manila envelope delivered to his motel room. Inside there was no letter, only the prenuptial agreement he had signed 5 years ago. A single clause was highlighted in yellow marker, Clause 17B. In the event of gross misconduct, including but not limited to criminal activity or marital infidelity resulting in public scandal, all claims to marital assets, shared or otherwise, are irrevocably forfeited. He finally understood. The document wasn't a shield for her modest savings. It was a guillotine, and his own actions had triggered its fall. Faced with the prospect of a drawn-out public trial and decades in prison, he accepted the plea deal 7 years in a federal facility. He had chased $1 billion dream and had woken up in a 6 by 8 foot nightmare, while their worlds crumbled. Charlotte's was being built anew. She did not, as the press speculated, embark on a revenge tour. Her work was far more subtle and constructive. She assumed the interim CEO role at Prescott Consolidated, walking into the boardroom, not with arrogance, but with a quiet, steely competence that immediately silenced any doubters. She knew the company's portfolio better than they did, a result of her years of secret study. Instead of gloating, she focused on turning her victory into a new legacy. Her first major act was the creation of the Prescott Urban Development Initiative. She used the assets acquired from the Henderson Group deal as its foundation. For too long, she announced to the board, this company has focused on building monuments to wealth. Luxury towers, exclusive resorts, structures that serve the few. But I spent 5 years living an ordinary life. I saw the struggles and the aspirations of people who aren't on our balance sheets. The future is not in building higher walls, but in building stronger communities. She poured hundreds of millions into buying distressed urban properties, many from the fallout of Sterling Ross's collapse. But where they had planned sterile glass condos, Charlotte commissioned plans for something radical: integrated living spaces. These were communities with affordable housing, beautiful public parks, subsidized daycare centers, and small business incubators designed to give local entrepreneurs a start. It was a revolutionary concept, blending shrewd capitalism with profound social responsibility. She was using the tools of an empire to dismantle the very exclusivity it was built upon. Months later, Marcus Thorne found her not in her grandfather's imposing office, but on a muddy construction site, wearing a hard hat and jeans, animatedly discussing blueprints with a young female architect. The project was the first of her new communities, and she was involved in every detail. I received the final dissolution decree this morning, Marcus said, handing her a folder. It's officially over. Adler is a non-entity. Charlotte took the folder, but didn't open it. She looked out at the steel skeletons of buildings rising against the sky. It feels like it was over a lifetime ago, she said. He was just a catalyst. A catalyst for this? Marcus asked, gesturing to the bustling worksite. Your grandfather would have admired the ruthlessness of the takeover, but I'm not sure he would have understood this part. Grandfather built an empire to protect himself from the world," Charlotte said thoughtfully, a cool breeze whipping a strand of hair across her face. "I ran away from that empire because I was afraid it would consume me. I built a small, simple life to hide in. Both were forms of defense. Both were prisons in their own way." She turned to him, her eyes clear and resolute. "Ben's betrayal was ugly and painful, but it taught me something essential. It forced me to stop hiding. I realized that power isn't something to run from or hoard. It's a tool. You can use it to build walls, or you can use it to build bridges." He thought taking my money would give him power, but he was wrong. Real power is having the freedom and the vision to build a world you actually want to live in. She was no longer Charlotte Vance, the fearful runaway, or Charlotte Adler, the betrayed wife. She was Charlotte Prescott, standing in the heart of her new vision, not on the ashes of her revenge, but on the foundations of her reclaimed future. She had taken back everything, not just from the man who wronged her, but from the fears that had held her captive for a decade. And in doing so, she was building an empire greater and more meaningful than any fortune she had inherited. Charlotte's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the money you have, but the integrity you keep. It's a testament to the fact that the most dangerous opponent is the one you underestimate, and that a woman's quiet patience can be the calm before the most devastating storm. She played a part to find a genuine life, but when that life was revealed as a lie, she refused to be a victim. Instead, she became the victor, reclaiming her power, not with reckless emotion, but with cold, brilliant precision. If you were moved by Charlotte's incredible journey from a hidden heiress to a powerful queen of her own destiny, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a story of epic real-life drama and ultimate revenge. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next story. What would you have done in Charlotte's position? Let us know in the comments below.